Hello and welcome to our conference about evolution versus creationism. And I'm very happy to welcome as well Eugenie C, a physical anthropologist, a former university professor, and since 1987, executive director of the National Center for Science Education. She is one of the world's leading experts on creationism and intelligent design. So we could not have invited a more prominent person to our topic as you, Eugenie. Welcome to our conference.
Thank you so much. I only wish I could be there in person.
Yes, I wish so too. Perhaps sometime it will be so.
Indeed.
But before we come to our main topic, I want to send you many congratulations for the Stephen Jay Gould Prize you received. I think it was June this year. Is it correct?
That's correct. Thank you very much.
Okay. Perhaps you can tell us some words about the prize. What is the prize awarded for?
The prize was awarded by the Society for the Study of Evolution, which is an American professional society of scientists from biology primarily, who study evolution in many ways, but also paleontologists. And they gave me their first Stephen Jay Gould Award, which is an award they just began giving for to encourage scientists to take more of a role with the general public in helping to spread the understanding of science and of the content of evolution as well. So it was really quite an honor to be the first person so recognized. And I'm very much in support of awards like this because I think scientists need to be encouraged to share their knowledge and share their love of science with the general public. And it doesn't happen as much as it should.
Yeah, again, congratulations for this prize. I think this has to do with your entire work, and it has, of course, also to do with our topic, our subject, evolution versus creationism. I think we can divide it into three parts. First, I would be very interested in intelligent design in general. What are the argumentation? What are the strategies of intelligent design protagonists? And then the second point could be the current situation in the USA. And the third point could be the transfer into German context. What can we as Germans learn from the experience you made in the USA? So let's go to intelligent design in general. First of all, for perhaps the strategy of intelligent design. I remember the so-called wedge strategy of the Discovery Institute. For our audience, it is the leading ID institution in America. And 1999, they had 4-year goals. I think they wanted ID, intelligent design, as an accepted alternative in the science. They wanted influence in spheres other than natural science, and they wanted new debates in education. Eugenie, did they succeed so far?
They have not succeeded at all in their first goal, which was to establish intelligent design as a legitimate scientific and scholarly endeavor. And of course, the reason is pretty clear, and that is because there is an American idiom, I don't know if you have an equivalent in German, you cannot make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. You can't make something out of nothing. It would be impossible to make a science out of intelligent design because the organizing principle of intelligent design, when you look at it carefully, is that science cannot explain X, Y, or Z. And their assumption is that very complicated biological structures like the bacteria flagellum or the blood clotting cascade or the complex chemistry of the immune system are unexplainable through natural causes. Therefore, such complicated structures require the direct hand of God. Now, if that is your organizing principle of your discipline, it is impossible to turn that into a science because the nature of science is to explain things through natural causes. So it's no surprise that they have not been able to build a science out of what is fundamentally an anti-science approach. The other goals of the intelligent design movement, however, have been somewhat more successful. We could think of these as the social or political goals of the movement, because they have been able, largely through very clever marketing, very clever rhetoric, they have been able to get a disproportionate amount of attention from the press and the media for their movement. So they have become pretty well known. That of course was one of their social and political goals, is to put intelligent design on the map, as it were. And they have succeeded in doing that from a really very small movement in the middle 1980s up until the present. They have gotten considerably more press than their actual scholarly accomplishments would warrant. They also have had a surprising amount of success in convincing the general public that theirs is a legitimate alternative to evolution, and by appealing to conservative religious people in the United States, they have been able to influence the school systems here to either denigrate evolution or to promote the idea of intelligent design, although the denigration of evolution is a much more common problem than the actual teaching of intelligent design.
Yeah. To your first point, the unexplainability, I will come back to this point when we discuss the arguments of intelligent design.
Good, because that's a very important point when you talk about the nature of science.
I think so too, yes. But before the strategy of intelligent design, you said they have formed the broader opinion. And I think about the poll, the recent Zogby Poll, perhaps you know about it. Also, it was from the Discovery Institute. Discovery Institute, and they asked, did life develop through unguided process or intelligent design? And it was rather astonishing for me to read that the majority of Americans vote for intelligent design, and only 33% are convinced by an unguided process, synonym for Darwinism. What do you think about this poll?
I think the poll is very misleading because, as someone who has done a small amount of survey research in my life, I've done 3 or 4 projects which have involved asking the public questions. It's extremely important, as I'm sure you know and your members of your conference know, it's extremely important how the question is asked.
Indeed.
In this question that you've shown here, did life develop through unguided process or intelligent design? It's a very biased question. You're only giving 2 very stark options, whereas if you offer more options to people, you find much less support. If you offer the option, did life develop through unguided process, did life develop through evolution guided by God, if you ask that question in the United States, you get about 40 to 45% of Americans answering that, which is an evolutionary accepting response, after all. The question is worded very poorly if you want to understand what's in the mind of the public. The question is worded very well if your goal is to rhetorically bias your answer to get the to help promote intelligent design.
Yeah, I'm very happy that you evaluate this in the same way as I did. I wrote it down on my website.
That's because we're both quite brilliant.
Okay, thank you so much. But I think a parallel poll was established in the United States, and they had 3 alternatives, 3 choices, and the middle way was also opted by a lot of people. And so I also think if you force people to choose between 2 exclusive alternatives, they will probably be inclined to choose a religious alternative.
Indeed, especially if you're talking about the United States, which is a country with a very high incidence of people who claim belief in God.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, this is different in Great Britain and in Germany as well. The circumstances are more secular than in America, of course.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for this estimation. And let's turn to the main arguments of ID and how to argue against it. Eugenie.
The main argument of intelligent design is that very, very complex biological structures are unexplainable through natural processes. And therefore, the direct hand of God has to be involved in producing these very complex biological structures. Classic examples from the intelligent design literature include the vertebrate eye, the blood clotting cascade, the bacteria flagellum, and a handful of other examples. Now, it's very telling that the examples that they choose of this so-called irreducible complexity, as they refer to it, the examples that they choose are all examples for which we don't have complete agreement among scientists as to a natural explanation. With some exceptions, by the way. The vertebrate eye is pretty well understood, and they actually don't use that one very much. They tend to use the molecular ones more frequently.
Okay.
So they don't tend to use the examples like the vertebrate eye or like the middle ear of mammals, for example, where we happen to have a very good natural explanation for how these so-called irreducibly complex structures might have formed. In the case of the middle ear of mammals, we have a very, very good fossil record, but they ignore all those.
Is it documented? Their withdrawal, is it documented? Can you follow this in the steps of their publications? That at some time they don't rely on the eye any longer or the ear?
Well, in Michael Behe's book, Darwin's Black Box, he talked about the vertebrate eye, but you don't, that was a long time ago. That was 1996, and they don't seem to be dealing with that one as an example very much anymore. They tend to stick to the molecular examples, partly because they're more difficult for the public to understand, but also because there is less agreement in the scientific community as to the exact steps to explain these complicated processes. But, one of the problems that intelligent design faces is that the nature of science is to work hard at problems and eventually solve them. And so already there is a pretty good outline for how something like the complicated motor of the bacteria flagellum could have been produced by the incorporation of various proteins from related structures and so forth. There's a pretty good basic diagram for how you could construct something like the motor of the bacteria flagellum. And once, of course, scientists agree upon, that's very likely how it happened, then intelligent design loses a major example from their toolkit there.
Yeah.
But
is a scientific consensus that the flagellum is explained already?
Not that it's explained already, but that a lot of progress has been made in the last 10 years or so in figuring out a very plausible sequence of events that could construct the approximately 40 proteins. Now, one problem, and I can give you some references to this, one problem, of course, is that there is no such thing as the bacteria flagellum. There are a variety of different flagella, which the differences in similarities among them tend to be blurred when the intelligent design people are talking about this. They act as if they're only trying to explain one phenomenon. Whereas if you look at the full range of complexity of all of these different related structures, you can see some are simpler than others, some are more complicated than others. You can look at the proteins that are involved in producing these structures and see that they have homologous characteristics with other proteins. It is not an unsolvable problem. But as you were saying when we first started talking, the unsolvability of the intelligent design approach is something that's very problematic for science.
Yeah.
In science, we don't want to say X is unsolvable, therefore God. I'm sure in theology that's a bad approach as well.
Yeah.
But in science, what we say is we don't know yet.
Yeah. So
we don't say it's unsolvable.
Yeah. There's a difference between the categorically unexplainable on the one hand and not yet explained on the other hand.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the intelligent design people dig themselves into a hole by claiming certain things are unexplainable when they are merely not yet explained. And once we do have an explanation, well then, this is a good point, something that I've criticized intelligent design proponents for. If you show, let's say 5 years from now, scientists sit down and say, yep, we have a really, really plausible explanation for the variety of bacteria flagellae. We're happy, we're going to go on to a new problem. If this happens, the intelligent design people would not say, gee, intelligent design is now disproved. All they would say is, well, I guess we were wrong about the flagellum. Now let's talk about the immune system.
Yeah.
There's always something we have not yet explained.
Yeah, okay.
And so that is another reason why intelligent design is not considered truly scientific. There's no way to refute it.
Yeah, okay. Another argument, as far as I know, is the argument about the gaps in the fossil record or something like stasis. I think in Texas, McElroy has also pointed out stasis is an argument for intelligent design. Can you say something about this?
The gaps in the fossil record or stasis argument is an argument that the intelligent design people have borrowed from the earlier creationist movement, the young earth creationist movement, creation science. And it's a very old, it's quite a mainstay of anti-evolutionism in the United States. The problem here is that the intelligent design or their creation science predecessors believe in kind of a great chain of being or ladder of life view of evolution, where you have simple things evolve into more complex things. Invertebrates evolve into fish evolve into amphibians evolve into reptiles evolve into mammals and birds and the rest. And given that mindset, what they expect is to be able to find in the fossil record an unbroken chain of tiny, tiny differences from one grade or one level of life to another. And of course, that's not how evolutionary biologists and paleontologists look at the process of evolution at all. When evolutionary biologists look at evolution, they look at it as a branching and splitting of lineages through time. And when you look at the nature of the fossil record, you don't expect to find a full record of every single species that ever lived. I mean, I like to go
ahead.
I use the example that we don't know what President Abraham Lincoln ate for lunch on February 3rd, 1862. That doesn't mean President Lincoln didn't live or didn't have a life. Okay. Any sort of historical data is going to be incomplete, and that includes the historical data recording the evolution of species. So we never expect to find this unbroken series of fossils. What we do have in the fossil record, and more every year, is wonderful examples of transitional structures that help us to understand how it is that modern-day lineages evolve from previous lineages.
Yeah. that you don't expect the missing links is according to Stephen Jay Gould, I suppose. And also McElroy referred to Stephen Jay Gould. Is it just cherry picking when he refers to Stephen Jay Gould?
Oh, a classic. Yes, I'm afraid the creationists of all stripes, either the intelligent design or the creation science proponents, they all specialize in cherry-picking through the scientific literature to find the quotes that seem to support them. And we have looked at a lot of these claims, and if you go back to the original articles, certainly these are out-of-context quotes that do not reflect the views of the authors in almost every case.
Okay.
It's a phrase that is sometimes used as quote mining, as if you're going to the mine and pulling out those quotes which support you, but leaving all the rest of the quotes.
Okay, thanks. And concerning the scientific quality, is it really true that there are no peer-reviewed articles by IB proponents? Because in the interview, I think Stephen Meyer pretends to have peer-reviewed articles. How is it?
If you listen to Steve Meyer and the other ID proponents carefully, they will talk about peer-reviewed literature, and what they're including in that list is books that they've published and sometimes op-eds in newspapers and the rest. You make an extremely important point, and I'm so glad you brought it up, because there's a big difference between publishing a book and publishing a peer-reviewed article in a journal, a scientific professional journal. Books are published because the publisher believes they will sell and will make money. There are many very good books. There are many terrible books. There are many very good books that never get published because publishers don't think they'll make money. The fact that one has written a book supporting intelligent design does not make that a peer-reviewed scholarly production. Now, as to the scientific literature, as to the actual scholarly literature of intelligent design, there is one article which can legitimately be claimed as being a peer-reviewed journal article, and that was an article that Steve Meyer wrote a couple of years ago, 2004, in a very small systematics journal published by people at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, and it's called the Proceedings of the Biological Society of Washington, PBSW. Mm-hmm. And that article was an article that surprised the readers of that journal. In fact, as soon as it was published, we started getting telephone calls from NCSE members who had seen that, and they were extremely surprised that this article had been published in this journal, because the article had nothing to do with the normal content of the journal. The article had to do with the Cambrian explosion and why the kind of stasis you're talking about, the kind of sudden appearance of the body plans of Cambrian invertebrates, is evidence for intelligent design and evidence against evolution. And of course, that's not what PBSW journal is all about anyway. It's about describing new species that come up, the latest bryophyte or the latest mollusk. I mean, it's a wonky little systematics journal. And when people on the board of directors started investigating this, they found out that the editor of the journal happened to be a friend of Steve Meyer's and had slipped this article in, even though it was inappropriate for the journal. And the consensus was it had not been given proper peer review. It had not been reviewed by people who actually know anything about the Cambrian or know anything about information theory or the other topics of the article. And much to, I'm sure, Steve Meyer's embarrassment, the publishers of the journal, their editorial board, withdrew the article. Okay. So the one claim that they would have, that they have a peer-reviewed journal article, was withdrawn. Now, the second category of articles that they claim are published and support ID are articles that actually don't mention intelligent design at all. Mm-hmm. The best example of that is an article by Michael Behe and a mathematician named Snopes that was published in Protein Science in, I think, 2006. And the Behe-Snopes article was kind of an odd article about the supposed impossibility of getting 2 point mutations at the same time. Mm-hmm. And in the very next issue of that same journal was a very, very thorough evaluation of that article, which when you read it, you wonder why the first article was published at all, because it's clear that the proponents, Behe and Snopes, really didn't understand what they were talking about. But no, the phrase intelligent design occurs no place in the Behe and Snopes article. So they might claim that there are articles that support intelligent design, but unless intelligent design is made explicit, that's kind of a hollow claim.
You've pointed out that intelligent design is bad science, and I always try to argue that intelligent design is also bad theology. If you will refer to the gaps we mentioned, I think if a gap in the explanation is an argument for God, the later on explanation of the gap is an argument against God. So I think it's a bad theology as well.
I've heard that from many theologians who would agree with you that God of the gaps explanations for science are extremely poor theology and not at all in support of theism.
Yeah. Once I heard you quote John F. Hort, as if I remember it correctly. I think he said in Analogy of Theodosius Dobzhansky, nothing in theology makes sense except in the light of evolution. Is this a correct quotation?
Yes, I actually heard Jack Hott say that at a conference, and I was quite delighted, and I'm sure he's used the phrase since.
Okay, you are not a theologian, but what did he mean with it? Can you do you have an idea?
I think
because before the evolution was described, we have already had theology, and it also made sense to have theology before Darwin.
Of course, and I'm sure that the way Theodosius Dobzhansky was using that quotation in the context of biology was rather different from how Jack Hott was using it in the context of theology, but the same. It's still a useful phrase. I can't speak for the distinguished John Hott, clearly, but what I think he was very likely talking about is that any view of God has to be consistent with our understanding of nature. Any view of God has to reflect what we know about the real world. You can't have a inconsonant view, shall we say. Mm. And I suspect that what he was reflecting on is that because evolution, not just biological evolution, but cosmological evolution, geological evolution, as well as biological and anthropological, if you will, because the idea that the Earth, that the universe has had a history, that the universe has cumulatively changed through time, which is what the grand view of evolution is something that has to be incorporated into theology for theology to make sense. The idea of special creation, that God produced the entire universe in basically one step of 6 days, if you will, created it specially in its present form, is an idea that John Hott would find, and all the rest of us, would find irreconcilable with what we know from modern science. Yeah. And that in order to have a consistent and useful theology, it has to reflect what we know from the real world.
Yeah. So I can fully agree with the notion nothing in theology makes sense except in the light of evolution. A great quotation.
It is quite wonderful. I do want to remind you that I can't speak for John Hott, but that's what I think he means.
Okay, thanks. Let's turn to the situation in the U.S. if you like to. I first think about the 2005 Dover trial. When I read the decisions of the trial against the Dover Area School District and the decision against intelligent design at public schools, I was so much convinced that it is that this trial would be a test case for other states. But now I have the idea, when I look to Texas, that we see that the impact is rather small, isn't it?
Well, it's actually the influence of the Kitzmiller versus Dover trial was extremely large, because at the time of the trial, immediately before the trial, we knew of a number of school districts and of several states that were just poised to institute regulations or legislation that would require the teaching of intelligent design. But the court decision was so strong and so thorough, and there was such a full court record of evidence, and both views were so clearly laid out, that those efforts to try to continue requiring intelligent design by law fell by the wayside. Mm-hmm. But it's important to know that the Discovery Institute, which is the leading organization for intelligent design, was not in favor of the policy in Dover. The policy in Dover was something that came up from the grassroots, shall we say. It was something that was encouraged by people who were inspired by intelligent design and wanted to promote it, but who were not working in conjunction with the leaders of the movement at the Discovery Institute. Mm-hmm. And what the Discovery Institute ID proponents prefer is what you saw earlier this year in Texas, and what has been cropping up elsewhere as well. Mm-hmm. What we're facing nowadays is the idea that, well, let me back up a little bit. It's the same thing that intelligent design has been saying all along, that evolution can't do the job. Mm-hmm. All along they have been saying that there's stuff out there in nature, there's, especially in biology, complicated structures that you can explain through evolution. Therefore, God is responsible, and they call that intelligent design. Mm-hmm. What they're promoting in Texas and in Louisiana and in other places is the idea that evolution is weak science, it doesn't explain nature, and then they stop. They don't go on to make the second claim, therefore God did it, therefore intelligent design, mm-hmm. because that's the part that in the American legal system is not considered constitutional. In the United States, it is not legal to promote religion in the public schools. You can teach about religion, and that's an important distinction. You can describe religion, religious views, or talk about the role of religion in history or culture, but you cannot advocate religious views. And creationism, intelligent design, these are all advocacy of a specific sectarian religious view at that. It's not even the religious view that most American Christians would accept. Yeah. But what the current approach is in the United States is to denigrate evolution with the intent that the students themselves will then make that second, what the ID people consider logical connection. Oh, evolution didn't happen, therefore God. Mm-hmm. And it's an approach that they're hoping will allow them to duck underneath the Constitution, shall we say, and legally be able to promote religion through the back door, as it were.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think this is indeed a special situation in America concerning the First Amendment. We have a different situation in Germany. I think this situation also implies that there are specific code words which are used by intelligent design, for example, strengths and weaknesses. Are there other code words?
Oh, there's a whole list of code words and phrases. Strengths and weaknesses is what they've been using in Texas. In Ohio, the state of Ohio, a few years ago, they used the phrase critically analyze evolution. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, critically analyze in itself doesn't sound like a negative thing, but they don't, by critically analyze, they don't really mean critically analyze, they mean criticize. And that's the way the regulation was interpreted. Teach evolution as theory, not fact, is another phrase that you hear a lot. And this is use of the word theory not in the specialized scientific sense of the inferential explanation, but theory in the sense that it is used casually in English as a guess or a hunch. Teach evolution as an unimportant idea, in other words, rather than as a fact, as something that you can count on. So there are a lot of these phrases that come up.
But this is a bit difficult, I must admit I have as well. Sometimes I have the impression that in America or in English-speaking countries, they mix up evolution as a fact and the theory of evolution as a theory. Also, when you write the book Evolution versus Creationism, I would have preferred the theory of evolution versus creationism. What do you think about this mixing up of the empirical fact of evolution on the one hand and the theory of evolution on the other hand?
I'm of two minds. In one part of my understanding, I enjoy talking about philosophy of science with scholars and scientists. How we define these terms is very important. On the other hand, I'm also, given the nature of my job in dealing with the general public and their understanding of science, I'm also very concerned that we not let our professional definitions confuse us about what the public is understanding. The public does not make the fine philosophy of science distinctions that you and I might make if we were sitting over one of your wonderful German beers in a discussion about science. When the public hears the word theory, the public thinks something that's unsure or uncertain or just a whim. And so I tend, when I talk with the general public, or I do a radio show or write an article for the public, I tend not to use the word theory at all. I talk about evolution is an explanation for the fossil record, or for the biochemical similarities and differences, or for the anatomical similarities and differences of animals. I talk about explanations in science. I don't talk about theories and laws and hypotheses and stuff like that, because then I have to go and define them. Now, if I'm sitting with you or a bunch of other scholars, and we can have a final discussion about whether theories are inferential logical constructs which incorporate facts and laws, etc., and that's the way I look at it. Laws are descriptive generalizations. Hypotheses are testable statements that are either corroborated or refuted. We can go on and on about definitions. I think that evolution is an inference. The idea that living things had common ancestors is an inference, therefore it is a theory. You can observe things like natural selection. You can observe things like drift. You can observe the mechanisms of that bring about this kind of change through time. And I would say that something like natural selection is a law. It is a descriptive generalization that tells you what will happen under certain circumstances. And given the circumstances of variation and environmental change and differential adaptation, you get natural selection. Fine, that works really well. So I would say, if I'm talking to scholars, that evolution is an inference. It is a theory, because theories are inferential. Whereas the mechanisms of evolution, like natural selection, those I would refer to as laws. But in the public, I would not get into that kind of a discussion.
This is the application of your KISS principle, isn't it?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
So it's a matter, it's a practicality kind of thing.
Yeah.
If you're writing an article for a newspaper, or if you're on a radio talk show or a television show, you have limited time. If you have a whole semester with a group of students to deal with these issues, that's different.
Okay. Mm-hmm. What do you think about the future development of the intelligent design policy or development in school politics?
They may possibly try to come up with another term to repackage intelligent design, just like intelligent design was a new term to repackage creation science. But I think they're probably going to stick with the evidence against evolution strategy. Yeah. They're going to stick with the strategy of just beating up on evolution to try to convince teachers and students and the general public that evolution is weak theory, that research should not be funded in it, and students should not be taught it as a valid explanation. Because that's the one that's most likely to work for the legal system. Now, that said, in the administration of George Bush, there were many, many very conservative judges appointed to the federal judiciary, and a couple of very conservative judges appointed to the Supreme Court of the United States. We hope that there will be a long period of appointment of moderates to liberals, more likely moderates given the political situation here, for the next 4 and hopefully 8 years. But there still is a very large number of sitting judges at the federal and appeals court level that will have the first crack at any kind of legal case. Now, in the case of Kitzmiller versus Dover, which was decided by a Republican judge appointed by George Bush, we succeeded extremely well in getting an open-minded judge who listened to all of the evidence and concluded that the evidence on the part of the intelligent design proponents was insufficient, and that intelligent design was not science and should not be taught because it was advocacy of religion. The luck of the draw. I mean, who knows what the next case. The next case will probably be on the evidence against evolution. The next case will be whether it is constitutional to denigrate evolution in this fashion. We would argue that it is not constitutional because it is merely a stalking horse. It is merely a disguised way of bringing creationism into the classroom. We will have to convince a judge of that, because on the face of the policy, it would not look like that. You would have to go into the history, and we would need to get the judge to listen to the history of this movement.
Yeah. So in the Dover trial, you once succeeded in showing this. It was Barbara Forrest who came from your institution and showed the development in one book, and how the terms were exchanged from intelligent design, from creationism to intelligent design. I think it was very impressive also for the judges.
It was wonderful when we discovered that, believe me. We have the feeling, when we found that, we definitely had the feeling that this was going to be a very strong, that this would be very persuasive to the judge, and it was. We were able to show very clearly how creationism was defined in one way through several early manuscripts of this book of Pandas and People. And in the final version, right after the Supreme Court had decided that creationism was not, creation science could not be promoted could not be taught in the schools because it was the advocacy of religion. Right after that court decision, the phrase creation science was changed to the phrase, the phrase creationism in the book was changed to the phrase intelligent design. It was very transparent that this was just a relabeling of an old idea. And once that was made clear, plus the other support we gave, of course, the judge, I think, very properly recognized that was the history. And but of course, what we're talking about is the next step. Yeah. Can we make the link in a court between creation science, intelligent design, and evidence against evolution. I believe we can because the history is very clear. But whether we get a judge that listens to us is another issue.
Yeah. Can you give some notions of what it is, evidence against evolution? What is the specific point of view?
It's the same thing that they've been talking about for 30 years, both in intelligent design and in creation science. It's gaps in the fossil record.
Okay.
It's complexity. It's the same old, same old.
Yeah. So what is new?
Nothing.
Nothing. Okay.
The repackaging is new.
Then you should succeed in beating it. Okay. Now let's come to the last point, for example, to the question, what can we learn in Germany from your experience? Because our situation is, of course, quite another one.
But you also have, don't you? I'm asking now because, of course, I'm not there. I get some reports from Germany, but they're few and far between. But don't you also have an increase in conservative Christian evangelical movement? That
Indeed, yeah.
Missionaries are promoting conservative Christian views more?
Yes, we have, indeed. Although we have another situation in the school context, we have similar questions. In Germany, the question is discussed whether or not the doctrine of creation shall, for example, be taught in biology classes alongside the theory of evolution. This is a rather similar constellation.
Wow.
And so this is a very interesting question here in Germany as well. And so
that's fascinating.
What are your recommendations? How shall we treat with this problem here in Germany from the background of your experience?
I think it would be very unwise for you to present religious ideas in a science class. It confuses students about what is science's strengths and limitations, and confuses students also about religion, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, if you're going to present creation in a biology class, whose creation are you going to use? If you decide to use Christian creation, okay, you're making a choice there because you're leaving out other world religions, you're leaving out tribal religions, you're leaving out a huge amount of humanity, which also has views on creation. And you're only presenting one religion's view. But even if you choose Christian creation, whose Christian creation? Are you going to talk about Catholic creation? Are you going to talk about Baptist creation? Are you going to talk about Unitarian creation?
Yeah.
You don't even have a single view if you talk about Christianity.
Yeah. Perhaps we have a core argument or some core claims that are in consensus with other religions. So we could concentrate to that, for example. But
well, I think it's extremely.
I wouldn't do it in a biology class. I wouldn't do it.
But I think it's extremely useful for people to learn about religion. I think that comparative religion is a wonderful topic of study and should be encouraged, both in your country and my country. I mean, every country. In the United States, I believe we are not only scientifically illiterate, we are also theologically illiterate. I would like my countrymen to know more about religion and its role in culture. But that said, if you are going to teach creation in a social studies or history or sociology or philosophy class, you would be unwise to choose only one creationism. The idea of creation from a theological sense is extremely important in a variety of religions. And I think you would be serving students much better if you expose them to, tribal religion creation stories as well as that of the varieties that you find in the Middle Eastern monotheisms, much less Hindus or other world religions.
Okay. Perhaps one question which is rather concrete. You recommended teachers to facilitate such learning by incorporating cladistics and tree thinking into the curriculum. What is this? What alternative is it compared to the current situation?
The current situation in most textbooks and what most teachers understand, because that's what they were taught, is the classic Linnaean taxonomy of kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species, which is this hierarchical grouping, which is a good way of, it has been useful for a long time as a way of grouping living things. But what biologists have found is that if you can have a classification system that actually reflects the genealogical relationship of organisms, it is much stronger and much more powerful than a classification system like Linnaeus that just deals with similarities and differences. So what cladistics is a way of classifying organisms that reflects their genealogical or evolutionary relationship. So in a cladistics taxonomy, for example, crocodiles and birds would be placed more closely together than would crocodiles and reptiles, because crocodiles and birds shared a common ancestor with each other more recently than they shared a common ancestor with creatures like snakes or lizards. So a cladistic analysis and tree thinking is very important if you're going to be able to more clearly understand nature and understand the relationships among species. But also, tree thinking is important, and I advocate it in my book, and other people advocate it, because so many people misunderstand what evolution really is. They misunderstand evolution as this, as I mentioned before, kind of a ladder of life or a great chain of being, of this unbroken sequence of greater and greater complexity, whereas actually what has happened is a branching and splitting of species through time. A question that I get asked a lot on the radio and in public audiences: if man evolved from monkeys, why are there still monkeys? Okay. Yeah. Now, my answer to that is to say, well, if you evolved from your cousin, why is your cousin still here? And of course, the person asking says, well, no, I didn't evolve from my cousin. Well, you didn't evolve from a monkey either. Just like you and your cousin share a grandfather as an ancestor, we and monkeys shared an ancestor, but we are not descended from monkeys. That's the difference between tree thinking and this sort of linear great chain of being thinking.
Okay, now I understood this. Would you advise or would you recommend to think about the limits of methodological naturalism in biology classes, for example, not religious point of views, but philosophy of science, for example?
Well, the idea of methodological naturalism is that you restrict yourself to explaining only through natural causes when you're dealing with the natural world. Yeah. And of course, from the standpoint of science, methodological naturalism is a strength, not a limitation. Because if you limit yourself to looking for natural causes, that keeps you looking. It keeps you from being lazy. Now, it may be that you have to say at some point, we don't know yet. It may be that you don't have the instrumentation or the theory or the information to be able to say, this is the explanation for that. You may have to say, I don't know yet, but we'll keep looking for a natural cause. Mm-hmm. It is in fact the only way that science has really been able to progress in the last 300 years is by being patient and keeping on looking for those natural causes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think I would make strong the idea that that there are many perspectives on phenomena, and the naturalistic perspective is one perspective under other perspectives. They must not interfere, but there are legitimate different perspectives on the nature, on evolution, for example.
Well, I think there are many legitimate perspectives that human beings use, including aesthetic perspectives. Yeah. I mean, there are lots of different ways of looking at reality, if you will. But I look at science as a limited way of knowing. Science is limited to just trying to explain the natural world. Now, that gives us a lot of things to play with, of course, because the natural world is huge. But I don't think science is going to tell us in any meaningful way why I like Mozart but I don't like jazz. Now, I suppose if we really were to investigate all of my neurons, we would be able to find some reason why, some natural cause why I like Mozart but I don't like jazz. But that would not be very useful to us. It would be a superfluous exercise. I mean, we're dealing with a matter of aesthetics.
Okay.
When it comes to evolution, if we understand it as this inference of common ancestry, that living things have branched and split through time to their present diversity, that to me seems to be a product of the natural world. There may or may not be a supernatural intervention. That's a matter for theology. But because science is stuck with trying to explain the natural world through natural causes, I would need to be convinced that there was a need to go beyond natural causes for explaining just this phenomenon of how the modern world came, how modern living things came to their present diversity. Now, if there's purpose or meaning or these other aspects to evolution, fine. Then we can talk about philosophy and religion and non-scientific ways of knowing.
It's another discourse, and it's
Indeed.
not within the causal discourse of the biology. Okay. Now, I would like to discuss with you persons like Richard Dawkins, but I think it's another topic, and we have not so much time to talk about this today now. But perhaps shortly before the end of our interview, let's have a look to your next book. I think it's the second edition of Evolution versus Creationism. What is in there which is new compared to the first edition? Can you tell us something about that?
Yes, in the second edition, I added 2 new chapters. One to the history section, bringing the legal and current events, as it were, up to the present. It includes a full discussion of the Kitzmiller trial, as well as some other less well-known legal developments, the Cobb County, Georgia textbook sticker case and others. And then there's a second new chapter on polls and surveys, because it seemed to me that there was an awful lot of information coming out on attitudes and knowledge of evolution among scientists, the general public, teachers, and I incorporated readings from those sources. And I also went through the chapters and eliminated some readings which I thought were better reflected with more recent material. But one of the new things about the book, which I was rather pleased about, if in the first edition of the book, when I requested permission from the intelligent design proponents to publish
the text.
Publish their writings, publish opinion pieces that they had written for newspapers, for example, or other easily available material that was on the web, I was refused. And so that was unfortunate, but what I had to do in the first edition is to summarize their views in my own words and then give references to where people could check my summaries and so forth. Well, the nice thing is that with all of this legal activity that went on, especially with the Kitzmiller case, these people, the intelligent design proponents like Bill Dembski and Steve Meyer and the rest, filed all of these legal documents which are public record. And so I was quite pleased to be able to take some of this publicly available material that did not require their permission to use. So they are able to speak, whether they are happy with it or not, they are able to speak in their own words, which I prefer. Yeah.
So it is a very interesting news source for us to inform about the situation, especially also in America. So I'm looking forward to reading also the second edition of your book.
I thank you.
Eugenie, many thanks for your time you spent with us, and thank you very much for this interview.